Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Geoff Micks. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Mike Uziel. He's with Headwater Engineered Systems, and yesterday he hosted a Lunch and Learn roundtable discussion on rapid PDCA events. So that's plan, do, check, act. And he actually had an 8-step process that he wanted to share with people who joined his lunch. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I don't know what the steps are. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay, thank you for having me. I chose the topic because it's pretty near and dear to me with trying to develop suppliers. And typically a lot of these groups have less than 100 employees, little mom and pop shops. And the key in implementing these types of systems is so we get sustainability and the quality from these various suppliers. Now, the 8-step problem-solving method is actually what's educated through the Toyota Way. In short, it's breaking down the PDCA step. Majority is in the plan phase. We'll just go through the numbers real quick. Step 1, clarify the problem. Step 2, break down the problem. Step 3, set the target. Step 4, find the gap or find the root cause. Basically, what's the difference between where you are now and where you want to be? Develop countermeasures. Execute those countermeasures. Measure results. And then lessons learned. Continue to the next step.
So when you chose this topic for your lunch, and for the context of listeners who may not know, this is like a lunch and learn roundtable of 11 people who, Mike advertises, hey, this is what we're going to talk about, and people opt in. So who were you hoping would opt in and be part of that conversation? I
was hoping to have just a diverse group and this is what's great about the summit here, is just having people from all these different segments of the industry. Where I geared the topic toward is introducing the 8 steps, and most individuals that have been in manufacturing are familiar with the PDCA cycle. Okay. And they have various processes, whether they follow DMAIC or some other methodology. But what tends to happen when you have these processes and systems is that it runs for about a matter of 6 months, and you have some delegates that have learned it, and then it fizzles out soon after that because just the repetition is not occurring frequent enough. So I invited the group to discuss what sort of tips and tricks we might have to help maintain that sustainability of using these processes and embedding it in the culture.
Now, the Lunch and Learns, I think, are some of the most popular content we build into the agenda because it is actually interactive among peers. But the downside is in its very nature, only 10 of you took part. So yes. For the larger audience who wishes they could have been part of that conversation, what were some of the things that people were contributing? Maybe there was something that surprised you or that you're planning on taking away from the conversation. What are the takeaways you can share?
Best takeaways I think I got from the group was obtaining engagement from leadership. And it goes piggyback with MDI boards. It's an acronym for Manage for Daily Improvement. This is something that we use at our facility that seemed to be consistent in a lot of the other individuals that were sitting at the table. In short, it's a means of just kind of creating that forum that members from the workforce can gather around, go through targets of the day, but also use that to elevate issues that are happening at the factory floor. That creates that first view of what's the priority that people need to work on. So getting that first step, basically clarify the problem, break down the problem. But then the other piece that we discussed at the table is trying to create a cadence. And when you do these types of activities, there needs to be a structured approach where they're occurring at least once a month, if not more regularly. But something to help create that deliberate practice.
Right.
And that seemed to be consistent across everybody that was in the group. The other element that came to attention was discussion about reward systems, point systems, something so that basically kind of creates some additional motivation for that achievement when we solve issues.
I think a lot of companies focus on culture. So they've got a culture of continuous improvement, or they've got a lean culture, operational excellence, whatever term they want to use. When you're talking about establishing a cadence and a rhythm to walk through plan, do, check, act, were different companies sort of more or less confident in their culture, or what was maybe the experience level might be the way to say it, where there's companies that really struggle with this and ones that are really comfortable? Was that your experience going around the table?
It did seem to be a challenge across the board, and it's these tools in essence, are it's the scientific method at its core, and it's now trying to get teams of people to leverage using those tools. And the rub that we also got in discussion is that it's very often an engineer or a trained professional that is stepping in and performing that role. And I think if just kind of reading the group and getting the feedback is that a lot of the industry seems to be accustomed to that. A machinist is a machinist. They come in, they do their job, and trying to get this recognition that the job goes above and beyond just the normal tasks that they may have been hired for, so that we can have this collective mindset going into driving improvement. That seems to still be a gap when discussing with other members of the team.
Well, I can see what you're saying where, someone with an engineering mindset, it's methodical, and so it's a very attractive, like, here are the 8 steps that are going to tick these boxes and you are going to arrive at a solution. And maybe one of the things that needs to be connected is the person with that engineering methodical mindset is working with a team, as you say, the machinist didn't come into it with that mindset, but is still going to have to work through this structure. So this is where you're saying if you do it often enough, if you incentivize, if you make a culture where people start thinking differently. Why don't we talk about the incentives? You're mentioning there's a sort of a way to incentivize people to do more of this to get that ball rolling. How did that conversation go?
The main pieces that came out, there was a couple individuals had expressed a point system associated to when an improvement is suggested or when an individual participates in one of these activities, one of these workshops. And one group would gather these points, and then they would be able to use them kind of like cash. They'd be able to buy various things based on this credit that they get for participating, which I thought was pretty interesting. But what also stuck home was just small celebrations and creating recognition through that. Members, they used can't think of the different terms, but they're basically like quick wins that would be publicized in like just a little 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper.
I think people respond to a challenge, and I also think people have a sense of ownership when they contribute to a solution. So making that something that the community sees, of course, that's great.
Yep. Now circling back to it, as far as 8-step problem solving, what I would say is that what's good that you mentioned, like someone that has an engineering mindset may already kind of take to the tools more quickly. But the 8 steps is laid out in such a way that it's more palatable. It's something you could just more deliberately follow through step by step, kind of have a cheat sheet with you.
Now, you mentioned from your own experience, you were going into your suppliers, many of whom are small and medium-sized enterprises that, that a lot of that can be around like the founder's culture, what they wanted for their business. How do you bring those 8 steps to an outside organization? Because it's not going to be necessarily the same incentives you would use internally.
Well, actually, a lot of the tools used are almost identical to what you would do on a factory floor, and if anything, it's been just offering that service and starting with the format, giving the 8 steps very clear, but then laying out the expectation with that supplier that to make sure you see evidence that people are participating. I've spent time with suppliers, and it's amazing COVID has opened up the use of web meetings and some of the creativity. So a lot of suppliers are more comfortable with doing those types of workshops, even if they're via remote. There's software out there, it's called Klaxoon, which it's licensable and actually helps create templates that you can navigate through.
Oh, great.
Which is pretty neat too. But very often, a lot of the tools have been around for a long time. The 8D, created by Ford, it's going through the same process. If anything, you sometimes need an interpreter in place to help translate what the different steps mean and why they're important. So it's at the end, that deliberate practice is what seems to be necessary in order to help sustain it.
So I want to wrap up just coming back to this idea of, we have hundreds of people at this event. There was only 10 at the lunch. So for people who have been listening to this and wish they were at that lunch, is there a key takeaway you want them to think about further in the same way that you've come away from the lunch, probably with some ideas that maybe you want to apply to your own work?
Biggest takeaway would be that regardless of any of these tools that we try to apply to improve our processes, the emphasis has to be on improvement and engagement in the culture. It's instilling these virtues into the entire workforce and creating that environment that everyone can participate in continuous improvement.
Can I ask one more question, Mike? Because, I mean, you yourself are running a team. Is this something that you're seeing in your own work?
Very much so. At Headwater Engineered Systems, we instill it in our vision that we work with passion, integrity, and camaraderie. We have this posted and we reflect on this statement every day. It's posted at our management boards, and it's something that we exercise. That's what's created the engagement, that's what's created the participation, and that's that key in culture change, that we can instill these values in the individuals that we work with.
What a great note to end this conversation on. Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.